puntily, a helpful Saidian term, rather than disavowing texts written in previous eras out of retrospective feelings of disgust based on what he saw as their implication in systems of oppression and domination. Of course, later on, he himself saw this literary tradition less and less as a sole privilege of the West, but rather as something shared by everyone, complexly, a tradition interpenetrated by cultures of the East and the South, and also inherited by them. In what often feels like a cynical age, I have found Said's engagement with fiction as an heir to a particular kind of humanism encouraging and even consoling, a humanism that can evolve and expand beyond its exclusionary, bourgeois European and largely male origins, and that commits itself to crossing boundaries between cultures and disciplines, a humanism that holds the practice of criticism close to heart. In my experience, a writer of novels has to, at various points and to varying degrees, sustain a split consciousness. On the one hand, we must admit that novels are a form of entertainment, existing somewhere between movies and poems. They are narrative objects made of language with usually a beginning, middle, and an end. They are a form that was born in the age of mechanical reproduction, and they are sold as commodities, an activity that today has rather a lot more to do with branding and marketing than it used to, a fact that is particularly confusing and troubling to exactly the type of person who might end up spending their time reading and writing novels. And on the other hand, there is a relationship between novels and what, for want of a better phrase, you might call our spiritual lives. Some of us read them for comfort or to escape, some to learn about the world, some because it's a rare chance for concentrated solitude, to be neither working nor passively consuming the content of a screen, but thinking deeply about experiences other than our own, using some of the tools of our dream life, and listening carefully to the voices of others in ways that ask for our imaginative participation and that might also shed light upon our own experiences of being alive on this planet. Novels reflect the perpetuation of a human impulse to use and experience narrative form as a way of making sense of the world. This may seem obvious. As a person who tries to spend most of her time reading and writing novels, I sometimes find that these two realities coexist without issue. But often I find myself distracted by and even anxious about the mystery of what these texts really do in the world, beyond providing mere escapism or misguided attempts at moral instruction, which I don't believe in either as a proper use of the form. Said tells us that texts are worldly. To some degree they are events, and, even when they appear to deny it, they are nevertheless a part of the social world, human life, and of course the historical moments in which they are located and interpreted. This may be true, but it doesn't really help me, a writer, in thinking about what it is that I am doing when I sit down at my desk. Frank Kermode said that fictions are for finding things out, and they change as the needs of sense-making change, which I find a helpful formulation for thinking about how the novel, shape-shifting, strives for novelty, and how this relates to our need to find and create meaning. But most helpfully of all for me is what Sylvia Wynter said about the novel being a revolutionary form, because it is, in essence, a question mark. Perhaps a writer doesn't need to have a clear sense of what her text will do in the world. Perhaps a writer can relax a bit. Perhaps it's enough to ask a question and hope, perhaps, to glimpse the meaning of that question in retrospect. All writers have tics, a particular repertoire of moves that recur. Mine is probably the construction of recognition scenes, or moments of what Aristotle in his Poetics called anagnorisis. Recognition scenes are not rare in fictional narrative. In fact, they are incredibly common. You'll notice them in popular novels with unreliable narrators or dramatic plot twists, in soap operas and in Hollywood films. Nor are they a feature of only the Western canon either. They seem to be intrinsic to all storytelling traditions, as Philip Kennedy, for instance, showed recently in his meticulous study of recognition scenes in the Arabic literary tradition, including Quranic stories and the maqamat of al-Hariri. Aristotle himself was analysing plays that had been performed 100 years beforehand, so he was noticing pre-existing narrative paradigms and naming them rather than inventing them. And he gave the word anagnorisis to the moment when the truth of a matter dawns on a character, that moment towards which a plot usually barrels, and around which a story's mysteries revolve. In the classic shape of rising action that reaches a peak.